Um,
Okay, recording in progress. This is Dave's gig. He has something special in mind for us. I will be here to mute when I need to. And are you going to entertain some dialogue at the end of this?
yeah, I'd like to do. We got a lot of people on today, and my finger sensor has just got a little wonky.
Okay, then I'm going to mute myself and I'll kind of monitor the room.
Yep,
And
hang on 2 seconds. Hey, Will, I can't get the arrow to work to punch a button on the screen. Here at Command Central, uh, I like to get this notification from Zoom off and hit got it, and I can't find an arrow to do that. Oh, look at you. I get it.
hang on.
Okay. Don't hit stop share. No. Oh, that window? Can you drag the screen down? Hang on, guys. There we are. So is everybody there? Good. Sorry about the delay. Welcome to podcast Zoom recording number 2. This evening, I'd like to say thank you to everybody for logging on if you've made it. And for those of you that haven't made it, that's okay. We've had a couple of technical issues, so we're starting a few minutes late. Tonight's discussion is going to be about space belligerence and outer space ethics. And I'm going to leave some time at the end of the discussion and leave it up to you guys to come back if you have any questions. I really appreciate you joining in. So just off this first, I'm going to sort of read this off like a news panel. And as an astrophysicist and a member of certain organizations, I'm able to access a lot of really wonderful documents that don't come across mainstream media, or if they do, they come across 2 or 3 or 4 weeks after they've been announced. I belong to a lot of different European and American astrophysics and space technology organizations. And so I get sent newsletters, and some of these have really piqued my interest. So I thought the nice thing to do today would be to talk about belligerence. And belligerence, of course, is another word for bullying. Right now, there's a race for space from nations from all over the world: China, France, Germany, Japan, Taiwan, India, America, to get as much space and get their foothold into outer space around our planet Earth as quickly as they can. So with this one article, Space Force planning $8 billion satellite architecture for nuclear command and control. A request for proposals is expected in early 2024. So what we have is the Space Force is gearing up for major procurement of strategic communications satellites that provide nuclear survivable communications for the U.S. military and national command authorities. Space Systems Command expects to issue a request for proposals in early 2024 for the Evolved Strategic Satellite Communication System, ESS. It's a very interesting program, but there's really no such thing as nuclear gamma radiation blast shielding. We'll get to that. So ESS will be a survivable and jam-resistant SATCOM capability for the NC3 mission. And NC3 is short for Nuclear Command Control and Communications. So at the beginning, when we put together the Space Force, and of course their logo is straight from Star Trek, except it's a perfect apex rather than one that's slightly askew. They hadn't been able to put together a comprehensive enough list of things that they would need to do in order to have space superiority. So you'll find that in some of the articles that we breeze through, there are military terms. And remember that when the information comes from the military, that it's mostly going to be in terminology of control. So eventually replace the advanced extremely high frequency, AEHF. AEHF is a very advanced high frequency network that's already being supplied power to and being used by the US government and shared ally nations. Both companies expected to compete for the production contract. Space Systems Command has not revealed how many satellites will be procured for the ESS network. Well, let's go past that. So Space Force said ESS will be proliferated and resilient architecture of interconnected satellites in geosynchronous and highly elliptical orbits. It's interesting. How much space is available to the US government? Well, it's up to the US government. And right now, the US government hasn't got an ethics protocol for exactly how much space is belonging to America. One of the interesting things about belligerent nations is that they assume that as a human being, you have no rights, firstly. So why would you care? Why would you need to know what we are doing in outer space? Outer space belongs to the company and the government and the country that has the most control of it, as much as they want. There is no unified unilateral deal that's ever been written or ever been expressed through the UN or through NATO that discusses empirically what part or section of space belongs to America, what part or section of space belongs to Japan. Space belligerence is about organized crime on a military level like you wouldn't believe. This means that we got to get up there. We got to get our nuclear resistant satellites up there to spy on everybody. We're going to produce a space force that can shoot rockets, lasers, and all kinds of jamming frequencies from our satellites against other nations who are not in the alignment agreement with Space Force, which will, of course, be the EU and India, India being one of the few non-Western countries. I know Japan is being considered for this alignment group as well. So here's an artist's version of their nuclear-free satellite that will resist EMP pulses if upper atmospheric nuclear bombs should go off or missiles go off. We know that strike abilities for ICBMs that travel across the planet will have an effect in the upper atmosphere in a form of amazing aurora borealis, but it'll also knock out all the satellites. So this is an artist's conception, which I call a misconception, of one of those tough satellites should be able to ride out the rigors of nastiness of military activity. This is Brigadier General Jason Cothern. He's the Space Force Space Systems Command Deputy Commander. Now, somebody must have made a mistake, because I was able to access the Space Systems Command information with all the names of all the people and all the different levels of what they're doing with Space Force. And I think in the interest of clarity, that it's good that the US government made this information available to citizens, because it shows that they're interested in some transparency. So would you rather have your purse stolen by somebody that you don't see who's crept up behind you? Or would you like to have a belligerent thug just come up and say, this is who we are, this is what we're doing, and we're taking your purse as well? So in this case, I sort of allude to the guys and the gals that work for the Space Systems Command are people that are going to do whatever they want to do, regardless of what you think. This is a close-up of the Space Systems Command network. So we have Michael Gutlin, Executive Director Joy White, Senior Enlisted Leader Command Sergeant Willie Frazier II. We have Deputy Commander Brigadier General Jason Cothern. IMA to the commander is Colonel Michelle Idle, and IMA to the Senior Enlisted Leader is, of course, Command Sergeant Joshua Savitt. Thank you, everybody. Here's another grouping of things that they'll be taking care of for the American people. Tactical SATCOM, strategic SATCOM, narrowband. Narrowband For all of you that are into frequencies and hertz, we know that when we compress those microwave bands, they become very dangerous, and they run on what the FCC calls a narrowband frequency, which you're not allowed to activate as a normal everyday citizen, because narrowbands are exclusively for the use of the military and the FCC. Space Systems Command. There is a little different logo than Space Force, and so this is what it looks like. And that's as clear an image as I could blow up for you. It's just another tricky little item that they can stitch onto their uniforms, but that's what the Space Systems Command looks like. Anytime you want to know something about an organization that's going to go ahead and move into space, whether you want them to or not, and start setting up house, you have to realize that there can't be one hub where all of the information is disseminated from. We learned that lesson in December 7th, 1941 in Pearl Harbor, when we had almost our entire fleet in one location and they got bombed out of existence, and we almost lost our Navy. So the same thing is thought of when you're developing a network in outer space above the planet Earth. You're going to have to disseminate your authority, your military programming, your plans, and your secret acts through several systems that are all built within the command system. So Space Systems Command is an important thing to think about, regardless of what they say about the Space Force. And speaking of the Space Force, there it is, United States Space Force. Doesn't that look just like a Star Trek emblem, except maybe the little point down on the lower right-hand side would be a little bit lower, maybe not so sharp and angular, but there's going to be some words and some language used that they've borrowed from Gene Roddenberry. And right now, Congress is still debating whether or not to let the military call it the Space Force. There may be another name altogether, like the Space Corps, which is, of course, a French word, C-O-R-P-S, which is more inclusive to all special types of people that were interested in space. So Space Force does have that thing saying we're a force in space. It does have that belligerent connotation, but let's just go on to the next one. So lucky to get this. These are the career duties of a Space Force commander. You want to be able to assess the vulnerabilities of telecommunication networks and information that can be exploited. You want to analyze adversary threat systems and intelligence necessary for meeting mission objectives, disseminate information, economic, political, cultural, social, and geographic trends that affect national security, and conduct training on the collection and reporting of intelligence procedures and requirements. So that's one of your career duties as an officer when you want to work for Space Force. You need to have a high school diploma and a BS and a clean criminal record and be drug and alcohol free. This is a very important diagram. This is the big picture, focus on action. This is what we call a corellogram. And it's also known as a logogram, because it's a symbol that shows you that with 3 or 4 symbols or pictures, that it's a very deep and meaningful progression. And of course, it starts with action. So at the beginning of the road, and if you look at the chevrons on the background artwork, you can see that the psychology behind this is the road is coming to you. So right at the beginning of the road, there looks like some sort of bulletin with a bullseye and an arrow on it. That's your action. The next step is contextualization. And what is contextualization? It's taking the contents of the behavior and turning that into a mappable plan of action. Quantification is the next step from the Earth observation for GHG monitoring. Quantification is when you use all of your available information systems, computers, intellects, bright people and scientists and physicists and theoreticians and physicists, and you get them together and quantify the situation. But because the road is coming to you, it means that you must do this quickly. And then the last part of this is detection. But detection is not just to detect an action or the visuals of the contextualized scenario, which needed to be quantified. What detection is proof. So the satellites are brought into skirmish on the ground somewhere at 28,000 meters below the atmosphere, and the satellite takes an image of it. Your detection is also tied into the action contextualization quantification. Right, this is on Open Cosmos, which is an interesting space site that's available. I wanted you guys to pay attention to the Mantis satellite. For those of you that are in the BES field and they know about our friends and visitors, then you can see here that this is a public nod to the Mantis. So Open Cosmos's Mantis satellite prepares for upcoming launch aboard SpaceX Transporter 9. Mantis is an ambitious program, and we're excited to work with the ESA, which is the European Space Agency, to get the satellite into orbit in 2023. Once operational, Mantis will allow us to better monitor our use of natural resources. Isn't that interesting that the military has hired Elon Musk to look for natural resources which can be used, allowing governments and organizations to make more informed decisions to support sustainable resource management practices. And we all know that they're going to, find a pristine 2,000-year-old redwood tree watershed and just eliminate it because there might be 10 pounds of gold in the trees. We know that they're going to find new sources of radioactive materials. They're going to find new sources of nickel, cadmium, chrome, palladium, iron, rubidium, and they're going to use these trillion-dollar satellite programs to locate and strip mine things that the military and the Space Force can use for future programs for building satellites and spaceships to travel other planets. So get ready for this. And by joining the Open Constellation, what a nice name for strip mine Mother Earth, the Earth observation data derived from Mantis will allow many other organizations to improve their impact too, which means that, India wants to look for some harvestable minerals and wipe out part of the Hindu Kush and all the snow leopards and yeti and rams and sheep and fish and watersheds and tea gardens and Hindu temples because they found cobalt, and we need that cobalt. So let's loan the Mantis program to our neighbors and allies, India, or any other country that wants to buy into this program on a subscription basis. Polaris to begin testing fourth spaceplane demonstrator from September. German startup Polaris Spaceplanes has received approval for temporary restricted airspace, EDR, to begin testing its Mira spaceplane demonstrator over the waters of the Atlantic. And this is a super fast, hyper fast jet. They've just received permission to test fly it. So it's already been up and out. This one is really illuminating. Demonstration rocket for agile cislunar operation. Draco. Well, what kind of public nod do you think that is? This is the evil ones in the military trying to publicly cleanse their karma by nodding to Alpha Draconis and the reptilians. This is Project Draco, and this is their public nod. This doesn't get any worse for people who know what the draconian reptilian control agenda is. This is their planet. They're going to do what they want. Boy, have they got it coming to them. Draco will be a critical part of evaluating the technologies that will take us deeper into the solar system. Our intent is to lead and develop a blueprint for human exploration and sustained presence throughout the solar system. That is a very important goal. And we think that these advanced technologies will be a critical part of it. And this is Pam Melroy. Pam's the deputy administrator at NASA. She looks a little like Angela Merkel, but that doesn't mean she's a bad person. Pam is working for a whole group of people that want to support the U.S. military as much as they can. Why? Because NASA's, critically underfunded, always over budget, and the whole idea of Space Force has been a big sigh of relief for NASA because now they're not going to be responsible for leading the space agency. We'll let the military do it now. Isn't that great? Military instead of scientists. Oh, there's the director of NASA. I just thought that was such a great look. Look at his tiny little black beady eyes. Does he have eyes at all? They almost look like empty black sockets. Demonstration rocket for agile cislunar operation. So this is Draco. So for those of you that don't know what cislunar are, it's the space in between Earth and the Oort cloud, way far out away from our solar system. It's kind of like Voyager 2 is entering into cislunar space, because cislunar space really isn't an area where we spend a lot of information or a lot of satellites trying to figure out what's going on. But it's sure is a great place to step back with a new type of Hubble telescope and have a look at the entire solar system. So if we can get Project Draco put into place, what does that mean? That means that aerospace and the military of allied nations will now be able to view the solar system as a single item. Now, that has a lot of serious implications for people that play chess. NASA's Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena Independent Study Team Report, UAP, Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena. Well, we know what they are. They're interstellar conveyance. Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, I'll show you his picture in a moment, Director, All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. And this is NASA's little study of blurry tic tacs. And every one of those specialists that work for NASA have all said there's no such thing as beyond Earth sentience. These are all terrestrial-based anomalies. Oh, there he is. There's our new UFO expert for NASA. This is a good article. Booz Allen Hamilton, big aerospace company, wins Space Force integration contract. Integration. The Space Force awarded Booz Allen Hamilton contract oversee systems integration within its space sensing portfolio, which includes the missile track custody program depicted above, Raytheon Intelligence, and deep outer space. So we'll go to the next one. See that image is very curious. So a 7-year, $630 million budget package for the U.S. Space Force for systems engineering, integration of satellite systems used for missile warning, environmental monitoring and surveillance. Environmental monitoring and surveillance. The company announced October 4th, based in McLean, Virginia, Booz Allen is a large consulting firm that provides management and technology services. So for all of us commoners on the ground, management and technology services is huge swaths of very detailed information about launching spy satellites all over the planet. So there it is. Booz Allen got that contract. Well, $630 million. Isn't that amazing? Just that one contract. There's so much money being printed right now by the U.S. government because it's a grab that space while you can. Let's get up there. Let's get into space before our enemies do, our traditional enemies. U.S. Space Force together expanding our competitive advantage in space. Now, this is from a FPC briefing by Major General John Olson. He's the mobilization assistant to the Chief of Space Operations for the U.S. Space Force. This was Friday, April 14th, 2023. We got this information a little bit late. They have to wait 6 months for that. And there he is. Develops and acquires military space systems and conducts space operations to advance and protect U.S. and allied interests. He will discuss how the Space Force is working to build a force ready to outpace competitors while harnessing data and technology to maintain space superiority with allies and partner nations across the globe. And that's a pretty cherry-picked statement, but I can tell you right now, this guy's telling us right out in the open, just like Draco's admitting it's a reptilian program. He's telling you right now, we're taking over space. And if you don't like it, tough. Starlink Starshield offering won a contract with the United States U.S. Space Force. SpaceX launched Starlink Starshield internet service to support national security. Thank you, Elon. So he's helping the NSA, the DOJ, the FBI, the CIA, and the NSA spy on everybody. My aunt cheated on my uncle, right? But this is the information they want to know because it might be able to use it against you sometime in the future when you become deemed unpatriotic. So thank you, Elon. One more thing to not like you very much about. And if you look at that picture, look at the little lights and the webbing around the planet. Strikingly, it seems to include the service's top general political reports in an email sent out to all the Guardians. The unfortunate name given to personnel chief of space operations, Chance Salzman, voiced his confusion. Unfortunate name. All the Guardians, right? So they're being referred to as Guardians. I have some concerns with our current mission statement, he wrote, as quoted by Politico. My biggest concern is that the mission statement does not reflect why the nation has a Space Force and the vital functions Guardians platform. Guardians platform. And so we know, everybody in the community who is in contact with BES knows that there's been and there is a very successful large platform on the backside of Saturn. I'm not giving out any secrets. The US government, Black Ops Intel know about it as well. It's a rescue station, and there's going to be a lot of moves from Andromeda coming in and all sorts of things to rescue human beings and animals. They're all being prepared right now. So think about an ark and think about being taken away and rescued while Draco has its day. The memo goes to show that there's still plenty of disagreement over the military's branch purpose, which doesn't bode well considering the Biden administration is requesting a 2024 budget of $30 billion to fund the whole mess. Isn't that funny? Give $30 billion to Ukraine and then give $30 billion to Space Force. House committee kills Space Force in favor of Space Corps. So this is sort of a silly story, but it's true. There are Americans in the House committee that don't like Space Force because it's just too belligerent. And they want to call it Space Corps because they're trying to attract young people, much like the Star Trek Federation gets young people to go in and sign up for a 5-year term in deep space doing stellar gas studies and anomalous energy studies. Lease guidelines for the use of commercial satellite services. Saltzman. This is a great guy, General Chance Saltzman. We talked about him earlier. Chief of Space Operations speaks on September 30th, 2023 at the Global Aerospace Summit organized by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Credit Space News. Space News is a funny channel. It's run by an older couple. They're into selling stuff on Amazon, but they have a very successful email magazine that's on Google. So this is an interesting article. So Chief of Space Operations Chance, Space and Cyber Conference on September 12th, National Harbor, Maryland. And this is talking about the components that Space Force will make available to our European neighbors. And this is on a different channel, but you can see there from General Atomics is a list of jets that they want to sell to the U.S. government. Space Force will establish a service component for U.S. European Command and U.S. Africa Command. So the U.S. Africa Command is a new thing for us. It's actually been in development for the last 12 or 13 years. It started with some of the programs where we build satellite stations on small islands that hop, skip, and jump across the Pacific in order to maintain a sequence and to maintain a synchronicity of constant contact with these satellites. We need to have stations all over the planet. So now they're bringing it in Africa. Pardon me, just have a little drink. So the new component will help integrate, collaborate, and cooperate. Integrate, collaborate, and cooperate. Sounds like you're just signing on to boot camp, doesn't it? With our joint teammates. Yay, we all play football, don't we? Partners and allies in the region. Space Force and the U.S. military at large rely on commercial companies for a wide range of peacetime and wartime services. Why do we need wartime services when we're talking about even developing the Space Force? Well, I guess the Space Force is going to be our 5th branch of the military in outer space for what? Space attacks? Who are we going to get attacked from in outer space? By the way, tonight, you guys, China is launching 3 astronauts up in one of their giant rocket ships to go onto the Chinese space station. And we wish them well. China's had a lot of problems launching rockets, so has Russia. And so we just want to send a quiet thought of peace and love to those 3 Chinese astronauts, want them to have a safe journey. And like I was talking to my friend Lowell earlier, every time you leave this planet, you turn around and look out the window of your rocket ship and you see the Earth for the first time, you bust out crying because you've never seen anything so beautiful in your life. All of us do it. You look at the planet and you start crying. And I know that these 3 young Chinese astronauts are all going to have a real teary session. And it's going to be good for them because they're going to get a whole new perspective on Mother Earth. He characterized the current period as a true golden era for commercial space. It's a true golden era. It's a free-for-all, grab ass for anybody that's got the energy and the power and the money to do it. And so right now, Space Force is saying it's a golden era while they move up to all these different levels of space. Now, one of the levels that you have to consider when you're an astrophysicist or you're a mechanical engineer, like our friend Steve Turpin, Steve's company used to build satellites. One of the regions that you want to think about is what we call LEO. And LEO space is near Earth, low Earth orbit. So LEO satellites are easier to drop into place. They tend to be microsats, microcubesats, CubeSats that go up to like 1 meter and weigh about 400 pounds. And the ones that are a little bit bigger have retros on them. But we know a microsat or a CubeSat's going to have a half-life of 5 years to 10 years. Then it's going to go woo and come back down to Earth, right? So it's a true golden era for anybody to get their rocket up there and get the biggest guns and go up there and hold that space, because it's a race for space like you guys wouldn't believe right now. It's all about military superiority. It has nothing to do with contacting sentient species or contacting the divine creator. This is about, we're going to take our garbage off the surface of the planet Earth and put it up in the sky so high that no one can see what we're doing, and then we're going to fight each other up there. One way we're addressing future challenges is by exploring ways to better integrate commercial space. This is just a pseudonym for allowing any evil company like Raytheon or JPL to continue doing the evil shit that they've always been doing since World War II. The Space Force is running a separate program for the ground segment of ESS and selected Lockheed Martin and Raytheon to develop competing ground system concepts. So there's Lockheed Martin, which of course is Skunk Works, which is of course downed interstellar conveyance technology that's been reverse technology and applied to stealth bombers, Velcro, Ziploc bags, you name it. It's all BES technology, and that's Skunk Works. And so who do you think they're going to go to for really powerful weapons programs, really powerful weapons platforms, and new space station development ideas? Trillions of dollars are going to be spent in this next race for space, and both companies are expected to compete for the production contract. The Space Systems Command has not revealed how many satellites will be procured for the ESS network. Della Pena in his briefing said the ESS space segment is an $8 billion program, which isn't a lot. So that should probably net them, a few hundred satellites. In budget justification documents, the Space Force said ESS will be a proliferated and resilient architecture of interconnected satellites in geosynchronous and highly elliptical orbits. We'll go back to that. Highly elliptical orbits are when you have these huge long ellipses. And what that does is, if you're going to try and attack one of our spy satellites or one of our war mechanism satellites or one of our machines that just shoots missiles and lasers, what that thing is going to do is travel away from you. So by having higher geosynchronous elliptical orbits means that the enemy, whoever that's supposed to be, is going to have to chase your satellite, and it'll be much more difficult for them to plot a trajectory path for an ICBM up in space to shoot that down. That's why we're working on hypersonic missile technology and supreme sonic sound technology in order to get things go just near light speed. Extremely high frequency network, blah, 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 prototypes. Boeing and Northrop Grumman were selected in 2020 to build ESS satellite prototypes. So back in 2020, they were given that $8 billion to build prototypes. Space Force planning $8 billion satellite thing. We've already seen that. Oh, there we go. What's that? This is a plutonium pellet pack, and it holds about 1 kilo of plutonium-239. It's a forever battery. So when you think about battery packs and energy packs, people go, oh, it's solar. It's a solar panel on the satellite. It's solar. Well, if you want to put together 40 million or $140 million satellite that has weaponizable attributes, you're not going to rely on solar panels for immediate use. What do you do when your satellite's flying around India and your command central is at Cape Canaveral? How are you going to get that satellite to work? You're going to hope that your highly fabricated compressed NiCad batteries or your lithium batteries, because they have a battery pack that looks like 8 sticks of dynamite. It's in a box about twice the size of a bread box, and it has its junction wires and its control wires and timing mechanisms all tied into the rest of the functions of the satellite. Those weigh anywhere between 28 to 45 kilograms. And when you want to send a satellite or you want to send a weapon up to outer space to low Earth orbit or just above that, the thing that you have to think about is mass to energy ratio. Mass to energy ratio. How big is my satellite? How much energy am I going to need to get that sucker up there and keep it up there? So one of the solutions is to have basically a thermonuclear device encapsulated in a nickel, cadmium, and lead container. Very dangerous. This is a recent image taken from one of our US telescope locations. They were trying to photograph a constellation, and this is what they got. And we have Starlink to thank for this. Now, Starlink's already successfully launched some 2,900 satellites. Elon's planning on eventually launching 100 a day for the next 100 days. Get him up to about 10,000 more. This is what you get. You get a lot of space debris in Leo. All right, so let's go back in time a little bit. When Sputnik went up, that was the first. And then we sent some experimental satellites up for the US military in order to link up our command Navy control. All of our command naval control. The US actually built a really fantastic satellite, shot it up there to actually have one that does something of service to the military. General purpose heat source, GPHS module. This is an expanded view, but there's your plutonium-238 fuel pellet, iridium metal cladding, carbon fiber sleeve, graphite impact shell. There's your arrow shell in the center, and then your fuel clads in fueled position. So you're going to run some anodes and some wires from the heat mechanism, and you're going to transfer heat into energy, just like we do with a thermoelectric or a hydroelectric plant. Primary battery types on satellites. There's hundreds of thousands of satellites in Leo. See, when we first started setting stuff up, we started sharing that Leo space with anybody that could put up a rocket. So the French government came to us in the 60s and said, hey, Telecom Europe needs a satellite or two. And the US government went, sure, we'll send them to Leo. And then there was stuff from the Middle East. The Saudi government wanted a television satellite. NBC Radio, CBS, they all wanted a satellite. Why hell, let's get a satellite out for everybody. And so the US government, through Cape Canaveral, until other Western European states started developing their own professional rocket launching systems and pads like Ariane, France, then we started launching them all into Leo. And that's a specific thickness of upper atmosphere, low Earth orbit, space atmosphere region. Leo could be anywhere between 2 miles thick and 12 miles thick. But within Leo are hundreds of thousands of geosynchronous satellites that have been flying around in a circle since the 60s. Here's some of the battery types. Lithium thionyl chloride, lithium carbon monofluoride, lithium sulfur dioxide, silver zinc. Oh, by Honeywell, Eagle Pitcher, Duracell's got their batteries up there working for the military. When these 44-pound power packs come back down to Earth, what do you think they do? They burn up in the atmosphere. They release unknown quanta of toxic particulates into the atmosphere. Oh, this is a nice one. if Steve was here, he'd go, "Oh yeah, that's an old GPHS." All right, so this is another version of heat energy production nuclear battery. This one's not that big, and it contains about 6 ounces of germanium, and that's probably mixed with a little iridium and some thorium. And it has a cooling heating system and is able to generate electricity for long-term old-fashioned satellites. Well, there's about 1,000 of those batteries in LEO, low Earth orbit. 1,000. Oh, look at this. This is one of my favorite channels. You guys, I encourage you to look for history.info. Interesting channel. 1964 satellite scatters radioactive. It's not slutonium. I guess it's the only way they were able to get the story up. It's the only place that still has this up. This information's been taken down by the US government for the last 15 years. You can't find it anywhere. 1964 satellite scatters radioactive plutonium-238 across the Earth. 1 kilogram of carcinogenic plutonium-238 was dispersed in the Earth's atmosphere. It turned out that virtually the entire surface of the globe was affected by this pollution. So if you look at medicine history, why people die, well, before penicillin, people were dying from an abscessed tooth, maybe a bad scratch from a rusty nail. People died from consumption, whooping cough, and tuberculosis. Terrible stuff. The swine flu, the Spanish flu, until penicillin showed up and saved the day. Interesting how cancer is never mentioned before the bomb. You go back into medical science history across the globe through ancient history, there's no reference to cancer. The US government doesn't want you to know, neither do any of the other dirty bastards that are building bombs and sending up weapons above our heads. They don't want you to know that all those above ground nuclear tests put thorium and plutonium and all these horrible uranium-235. All the little girls and boys on the beach sunning themselves in the 50s and 60s here in Southern California on the beach got rained on by all those nuclear fallout particles from the above ground tests alone. This one test sent a death knell and it rang a bell really loud in the federal government. On the day the American nuclear-powered navigation satellite burned down in Earth's atmosphere, scattering radioactivity in the air, it was a transit 5BN3 satellite, which is part of the American transit system, known as the first satellite navigation system in world history. In general, the system was funded by the US Navy, and its primary role was to provide accurate navigation information for the nuclear submarines that could target the USSR with the Polaris missile. And my grandfather was head of chief of security for McDonnell Douglas for many years in the 60s and 70s. And I remember when they had family day, we'd either all go down to Walt Disney World in Anaheim, and it would just be Lockheed Martin and Douglas McDonnell families, or we'd go to McDonnell Douglas and then they'd march all of us children in front of all these radioactive missiles and show us how great everything was. Transit 5BN3 was powered by a special nuclear device which contained about 1 kilogram of radioactive plutonium-238 that was actually not a nuclear reactor in terms of those that run nuclear power stations, but the so-called radioisotope thermoelectric generator. I showed you some images of those just a moment ago. The radioactive decay of plutonium is used to produce electricity by using the so-called thermoelectric effect. Unlike nuclear reactors, these devices are much more compact and can be easily installed in satellites. So when you send nuclear stuff up into the atmosphere, if it doesn't work and it comes crashing back down from LEO, it's going to incinerate in the atmosphere. Well, funny how cancer did a huge jump after 1964. Breast cancer, thyroid cancer, testicular cancer, lymphoma almost doubled in the years of 1965 and 66. Hideous cases of plutonium caused cancer all across India and Asia and Africa. These things had never shown up before. But they want you to go to the hospital so that they can spray radiation at that thyroid tumor, right? It's what the evil bastards do. We know that the Mother Earth can solve all the problems that we have homeopathically and naturally. I know it's shocking, guys. This is where cancer comes from. This one event, and it's only been getting worse since the above ground tests in the 50s. So the Americans did some tests to see where the radioactive material dispersed. After the disaster, it turned out that virtually the entire surface of the globe was affected by this pollution. It is interesting that about 1/4 of the radioactivity ended up in the northern hemisphere, despite the destruction of the satellite over distant Madagascar. So that's where we're at with information. And let's find a interesting. There we go. Sorry, guys. There we go. Play. There we go. Let's find an interesting picture to settle on. So it's not all doom and gloom. But what we need to do as citizens of the United States is to start voicing our concerns about what these guys are doing. You see, just because we have the ability to go up into outer space with our bombs, missiles, and satellites, our laser weapons, believe me, the laser weapons we have now make the crap look like from a James Bond movie look like ridiculous. We have laser weapons now that are portable, that'll cut through 10 feet of lead and steel in a period of minutes. We have hypersonic missiles now that travel near light speed. So you tell me, space belligerence is a huge land grab. It's like when they opened up the Wild West and they let all the people from the East Coast go yee-haw, and they went forward with hundreds and thousands of covered wagons, cattle, oxen, horses, mules, donkeys, and they were allowed to do whatever they wanted to do, and that included killing all the wild buffalo and wiping out most of the sweet, kind, and quiet indigenous peoples. So the same thing is on in outer space right now. It's a big land grab, only it's not land. It's a big black vacuum. But space could have things that live in it. Nuclear-powered propulsion is something that we should not be looking at, because when you blow off a nuclear device behind a circular dish, behind a rocket, and you have a circular dish, you blow off this nuclear device, it produces a jolt of energy that's very, very extreme. But what that does is it leaves a slowly dispersing radioactive bubble in outer space. So any other species or ships that come flying through that are getting triple, quadruple, centuple, double the dose. It's space cancer. You know, ion thrusters don't work. I have a system that I was shown called polarimetry that does, but I'm not releasing it. I'm not releasing it to the US government. Nobody knows what it does and how it works except for me and a couple of other top scientists. And they're all people that know about BES. So right now we're affronted by a massive belligerent land grab in outer space by people that don't know what they're doing. They want to arm themselves to the teeth, have absolute control over the entire platform of space above the Earth, in both Cisnal space and just above Leo. Now, sometime, I think last March of 2022, the Russians used a Landsat missile to shoot down one of their own satellites in Leo. What happened? Well, they actually had to call the 3 cosmonauts that were on the International Space Station and tell them to take cover on the far side of the station, because the Russian government just increased the debris field by over 500 million particles of shrapnel flying through Leo at 78,000 kilometers an hour. Remember that a lot of the particles of garbage that are flying around in Leo will shred you. If the space station got down towards Leo, it would totally be shredded like you wouldn't believe by a chainsaw in space of microfine particles. So Leo is a mess. So let's talk about space ethics. Now, space ethics are a subject that's very near and dear to me, because ethics are very, very important. Right now, the only organization that I was able to find an ethics review board had been put together was by the European Space Agency, ESA, but not requested by the ESA, requested by the EU, the European Union. These are the same wise thinkers that banned half the food chemicals that they use in America because they don't want to give birth to mildly retarded children. So the European Union has had the wisdom to produce about a 95-page document about what to do with space trash, how to avoid developing space trash, what kind of space trash is going to come raining down on us. Remember that when satellites go through their half-life and then their full term, if they're a retrosat where they have retro rockets in order to adjust their Lagrange point between above Leo or middle Leo or below Leo in the Earth, those run out of energy. They're still full of radiation. They're still full of toxic chemicals and toxic compounds that, when incinerated, create a higher ratio of toxicity because now you're electrochemically and thermolytically combining toxins into new forms of toxins. Picture this. If you smoke cigarettes, you know that we probably have 160 known chemicals that go into a cigarette to keep you addicted. But if you add light to that, if you light that cigarette, you're going to have over 50,000 thermolytic chemical composition changes, and you're absorbing that. So sucking on an unlit cigarette, if you're going to have a cigarette, don't light it. But the thing is that satellites are just like lit cigarettes being kicked down to Mother Earth. When a satellite degrades, they try and get it to degrade off the coast of Chile. And the reason they do that is because that's one of the larger regions of the Pacific that are North American friendly. Now, it wouldn't do any good to crash all of our old Delta rockets and satellite components into the China Sea, because the China Sea is already full of car batteries and plastic. The Chinese won't let us dump our satellites there. So now the US government quietly filters all of its toxic trash into the pristine waters of the Galapagos Islands and nearby Chilean islands and beautiful Pacific Islander people. They send all of the toxic space trash into the ocean off the coast of Chile. So the European Union has come up with a 95-page document. It's too much to show here, but it was a pretty good one. I read about halfway through it. You can go on to the European Union website, sign up and become a member, and access their political agendas and access their diagrams and access just about anything, because the European Union is actually a lot more clear than the United States government is. As you can see from some of the news headlines that I brought on today's show, things are worded in a way to sound slightly aggravating and slightly militaristic, because they don't want to just come out and say, we're here, you're not, you're in deep shit if you try. And that's basically what we're doing. We're belligerent thugs, and they think that space belongs to them. It makes me sick to my core that in the near future, say by 2055, they'll be able to do a United States flag the size of the continent of Australia in the atmosphere above Earth with Starlink satellites. Funny enough, when we talk about ethics, we think about human rights policies, because ethics surely apply to people, and then of course animals. There's all sorts of organizations for the ethical treatment of animals and ethical treatment of human beings. Then there's ethical programs that are written for prisoners, political prisoners. Hell, there's all sorts of ethical programs written for suffering, but there is no ethical program written for the suffering of Mother Earth. And our Mother Earth is a living entity, it's a living being. And yet, people like Chief of Space Operations General Chance Saltzman think that space belongs to America and its allied partners. It's a land grab. It's a new space race that's going on. These people are belligerent. They think that space belongs to them, that you have no voice in what's occurring right now. And that basically these little news snippets that are available if you spend enough 100 hours on the internet looking for them and joining all the different federal clubs so that they can send you news briefs. All this stuff was released anywhere between 6 months to 2 weeks ago. And it's a compilation. It's been hard to gather enough cohesive information about what the military is doing with Space Force. Now, it's been discussed with me by BES that it's doubtful that they have the kind of money that they're talking about, because we can't just keep printing money the way the Biden administration wants to do. Other world governments are doing it too. They're printing so much money that food costs 3 times what it did 2 years ago. It's scary what's happening, but that's the reality of it. We can't keep producing money. But if we're belligerent and get these satellites up there with our neighboring states and nations, and we can use this fine, fine technology, this fine, fine book learning, and turn it against the planet to find out where all the last resources of gold, palladium, and rare earth minerals are left. And then we can go in and take over. You know, the Afghan war wasn't about freeing Afghanis. God bless those beautiful people. It was about how much lapis lazuli, how much gold, and how much silver, and how much palladium. There are huge platinum and palladium reserves in Afghanistan, huge reserves of precious lapis lazuli, all sorts of mineral wealth in that country. The U.S. government went in and did all sorts of interesting excavations in the mountains. War these days, you guys, has nothing to do with saving people. It's all about the termination of indigenous peoples and cultures in order to make yourself more powerful. So we obviously think that everything will be fine because this is a great way to combat the evil that we see all around us. But it's really important for you to know the small amount of information I've given you today, it's okay to be upset, but turn the energy from being upset into something positive by being vociferous about the US grab on space, Japan's grab, Germany's grab, France's grab, Switzerland's grab. All these Western nations are grabbing space. And China knows it. China and Russia are working together. North Korea has nothing to do with it because they're broke. They're beat and broke, and they're a disaster. China and Russia know it too. And sad for them, it's Gog against Agog. And we have our allied partners, according to the military. Space belongs to everybody. It is not a place that you can wantonly pollute with your toxicity. We have cancer on Earth because of these very people. And they're doing what their grandfathers did. They're the same people that relive the same life over through whatever draconian life cycle system they operate by. And they think that the Earth is a trash can and that they only live once, so they can extract all of her precious elements in order to build a bigger and bigger space force. So the ethics right now are coming from Europe. It would be really great if the United States produced a European coalition of ethics. But so far, I did manage to find, through some of my partnership with federal agents, a Department of Defense document, which Lowell's going to put up a link to after this show. And it's about orbital space debris. It's a document that was written in the 50s and 60s. It was drafted back then, and they've amended it several times. It's a carefree look at how the U.S. national forces think about debris in space and what the best solution is. So I urge everybody to click on it because it's a Department of Defense document. I don't know how long I'm going to have access to it or how long the link is going to last. So it's a good read, and it tells you really what the federal government is thinking about doing with all the broken and corrupted polluting satellite particles and pieces and components that are all going to come down. So what we want to do to maintain space ethics is to produce a program which is ethical about the distribution and the array of how much stuff our government and governments of the world are allowed to put up there. It isn't theirs, it's all of ours. So if any of you have been, the center of your volition has been moved by this information, please continue on this stream. I know that with all the contacts that I have in the federal government and the military, that they already know I've voiced my opinion about the garbage that's being produced from the ideology of warfare. So we have to be ethical minded about everything that we do in outer space. This isn't our planet. It belongs to all the animals, and she needs to be respected. The Space Force is basically a joke. It's just another military group, and everybody wants to have the latest thing. Space Force in outer space for people who want to be in space and fight each other. The whole thing doesn't make sense at all. Now, on the other respect, you could say, well, it's just like the SDI program. They're putting the Space Force together so people can shoot at BES. Well, if you're going to shoot at BES, then you're going to need a whole group of people up there to fire as much as you can when you can, because within seconds they'll just use their minds and their thought control and shut it all down, just like they do the nuclear silos across the United States back in the 60s, 70s, and 90s. When the interstellar conveyance come in and hover over the silos, they turn the radioactive material into lead, and they fry the entire electronics launch system. They've done it before, they'll do it again. And one of the things that Lowell and I will be discussing sometime in the future, perhaps in one of these podcast series, is the nature of our sun and how our sun itself can have another Carrington event or an X-class flare that's a level 7 or a level 8 or 9 facing Earth. And trust me, when the sun has an X-class flare at that level, it will debilitate and destroy every satellite that's hovering over the Earth. They'll burn, they'll particulate. Unfortunately, there's a lot of them. So, in a new hope to produce an ethics program, there has to be a limitation on satellites and war weapon satellites and weaponized satellites that are allowed to be put up into space over the Earth. There is untold tons and tons and tons of plutonium, uranium, cadmium, nickel. All of these things burn together and become a toxic, metallic, carcinogenic gas that lands on the Earth. It cannot be scrubbed off, and we all get more and more sick types of cancer. So this is where cancer comes from. So that's the end of today's topic about space belligerence and space ethics. Does anyone want to chime in and add anything to that?
I have a question.
Go ahead. This is Asher. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Asher. What's your question?
Do you know if there's any technology that we'll be able to deploy in the near future to deal with some emission contaminants like car batteries and other stuff?
Well, I'm not really allowed to talk about some of the stuff that I know. One of the things that I do know is that the Swiss government is working on a space recycling program. And they're the only ones. And they may be working in coordination with the West Germans or the Austrians. But it's a ship that'll go up into Leo and start collecting space debris and space junk for return to Earth for recycling, safe recycling. And we're hoping to get this system up by 2035. I have some information on it, but not a lot. And so if you want to look into it yourself on the deep dark web or on Google, you can do a Google search on Swiss space junk recycling program. But as far as turning all that other technology around into stuff that's harmless, I don't know anything about that. Would there be anything else? Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you so much.
Great. Anybody else have anything they'd like to add? Well, I guess we're good. Lowell, is there anything you'd like to say?
No, buddy. I was riveted the whole time you were talking about it. And so, I know that there's unpleasant information in here. My perspective while I listen to you is to see it from our friends, our BES friends' perspective, and how disruptive and how ignorant we've been about the things we've just left in space without any regard for what we're doing to the universe and the ripples that causes. So thanks. let's see how we do. We'll see if the government likes it or doesn't like it. Time will tell. We haven't really touched on this kind of content yet, so here's the first blast across the bow. We'll see how it goes from there. But thank you for doing it.
Hey, you're welcome. As as a member of lots of different scientific organizations, a lot of stuff comes across my desk. And all I'm trying to do is produce some technology that'll help mankind, some puzzles and some math programs that'll help awaken our higher cognitive centers. But in pause for thought, I often see things that are being done in belligerence by world governments. And it's just as bad as chucking a cigarette butt and a beer can or a dirty car tire into a beautiful pond full of goldfish. There's no difference. Outer space is pristine, and the stuff around our planet should be protected. The Leo space. There's already a huge number of people that see Starlink satellites and think that those are interstellar conveyance fleets. They're not. They're just Starlink. It's laser array CubeSat satellites. It's weapons array satellites. It's spy satellites. It's whatever Elon and the U.S. government want to do. Now, I remember Howard Hughes ran into problems after he signed up with the U.S. government. They used him up and got him in trouble. So I wouldn't be surprised if the same thing happens to Elon. The U.S. government will infiltrate and use him as much as they can, and then they'll get him into trouble. And he'll probably, be found in a hotel room with 6-inch long fingernails chowing down on jelly donuts. It's terrible what they do to people. Elon used to be a very interesting guy, and I think he's sort of become sort of scatterbrained and controlled. And I'm very sorry to say that because I used to really like the guy, but finding out more and more about his ethical standards and his savoir-faire relationship with animal testing and Neuralink, I'm pretty disappointed in everything that he's doing, and would never ever entertain an idea about doing anything to help his organization at this point.
Yeah, there's more to being a human being than being a really brilliant engineer, which you can't take that away from him.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily mean that he should be leading people when you hear his perspective on things.
Yeah, I believe that very strongly. It's, and if a system collapses your economy and then they produce artificial heroes that all of a sudden can hire 9,000 or 20,000 or 150,000 people, that doesn't wash their karma. Just because he can hire 27,000 people, that doesn't make him a nice person. So
who wants to work for him?
People are desperate to pay those food prices that have been trebled, and people are desperate to get a car, because a lot of folks are still glued to their TV and they're getting their directions from their pharmaceuticals instead of their common sense and their inner voice.
Yeah, that's true. Somebody needs to say that more often out loud.
Well, this has been your friend and co-host David Wallace talking about space belligerence and space ethics. I hope the information that I was given to give to you guys today was helpful. There's a lot of stuff to follow back on and research. Just remember to keep a stiff upper lip. The battle to free Mother Earth from the clutches of evil is a daily battle, and we will meet it head on, and we will not fail. I love you guys very much. I want you to have a wonderful evening. God bless you and keep you. Be safe, and then we'll tune in, of course, next Thursday at 6 p.m. for our following show.